Yes. Hi. Nice. We usually start our meetings with a good period of prayer and reflection, but this is a Sunday, so today we're going to defer it, and I'll just draw your attention to the fact that the readings today are all about noticing God's work, or what we would say in J&P parlance, reading the signs of the times, especially today, climate change. So let's just recite together the Glory Be and implore St. Francis, patron of ecology, to bless us. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. St. Francis of Assisi, patron of ecology, pray for us. Thank you very much. Hi, thanks for coming. Plus, you want to come closer? Yeah, I'm sitting here. So that I can write. Yeah. So, Anthony, it's my great pleasure to welcome you.
Thank you.
With us here today. I'm going to keep this short as well because we've only got the 50 minutes. Thank you, Gary, for introducing us to Anthony. He's active mostly in the Pretoria Archdiocese, so we don't really know him in Joburg. So we really look forward to hearing from you and about you. Firstly, Anthony's a Catholic, CBC, educated, Pretoria, Ireland in Galway, Rome, and a year in St. John Vianney Seminary. He's a journalist by profession. He's worked for the Star newspaper for a long time, with a stint at the now banned, or then banned, The World under Percy Kumoza. His field's been education and political reporting. That's a very, very brief summary. He has his own management consultancy and a very impressive client list. He helps companies, big ones like Anglo, and government, big ones like the Development Bank, and NGOs, well-known ones like the Urban Foundation, with managing change and developing communication strategies around that change. Anthony is a skilled trainer. Do you recognize yourself, Anthony?
I'm beginning to wonder who this is. Do you? Gary must have put it together.
Yeah, he's
Gary's a good PR man.
Yeah, he's a skilled trainer and was drawn into training the journalists at the time of the transition, and also part of the Harambee African Leadership Program. I don't remember if they were here about 10 years ago, I think. Quite a stir they created.
Yeah, maybe different ones, but anyway.
Well, when, as I say, it was African leadership drew young people from all over, I remember that. On the environmental front, which is why Anthony is here, he's the founder with Helen of the Renosterspruit Conservancy, the very first of those conservancies. You know, there was a lot of trouble getting them going, and they happened more or less at the same time. It was a follow-on of the Green Action Group, and where I lived in Namibia in 1980 something, I heard about the Green Action Group, and there was no internet or anything then, so he obviously caused a stir. Anyway, he was also chair of the national body of conservancies, and then he was doing community work in catchment areas long before there were catchment management areas and so on. And the one that he started was taken over by Pretoria or Zwane, I think, local government, and now he heads ARMOUR, Action for Responsible Management for Our Rivers. I'm going to let Anthony speak for himself and on water, which we've come to hear, and to inspire us to be the sort of activist that he is. Welcome, Anthony.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Yes, there's a couple of different people in there, but that's okay. Thank you. Thanks, Judy. Yeah, you know, it goes back, I suppose, ARMOUR, Action for Responsible Management of Our Rivers, to 2015. And that was, now Helen had actually started the Karreebosrand Conservancy in 1987. That was the first in what is now Gauteng. And it became the Rhinoceros Nature Conservancy, and that's that area north of the N14. So there's been that involvement, and although Helen had stepped down from chairing the Conservancy, people were continually phoning her about issues. And then in about August of 2015, she got a phone call from somebody who says, you know, we have this persistent problem in the Yukskay River. It is running filled with sewage, and it has been for weeks. And we phone people, we phone Joburg Water, and nothing is happening. And it is horrible. It is smelly, it is full of sewage, and we don't know what to do. And Helen then said, well, you know, that's a problem. Phoning people doesn't seem to get anywhere. And she said, well, what about starting a petition? So, but the first thing I think that one needed was to understand how serious the problem was. And Helen had a friend in Athol Monaghan, who had a helicopter. And they took Helen up in a helicopter, and she was able to actually take a picture from the helicopter of Northern Works, which is on the right-hand side. And you can see the brown Yukskay coming down. And out of that channel, which is hidden, that's the normal outflow over there. But out of this hidden channel over here, it was pure sewage. And the whole river is black from then onwards, all the way down past Monaghan. 40 kilometers later, it was still basically black. And that picture that was used in the Star, but I think this is what led to giving momentum to the petition, which was drawn up basically saying, we demand the authorities take responsibility for their mandate to protect our common water. And I think the point of the petition was not so much we got that many people, but what we did is when we got it, we sent it to 60 plus organizations across South Africa, the media, the public protector, parliamentary committees, obviously the Green Scorpions, all the city council people, Joburg Water, etc. And we made it clear that we'd send it to everybody. So it wasn't just a nice little petition handed to one person. We actually got an interesting response. That was in about October by then of 2015. And the day after that went out, the Green Scorpions were at the Northern Wastewater Treatment Works. And the guy from the Green Scorpions phoned me and he says, you can see exactly what's happening, but what must he do? He can't shut down the works. So I said, well, I don't know what to do either. But at least you've noticed it. You know that this is not something that is a few people are getting a bit upset about, particularly sort of white, upper class river estates. It's something more serious. But I found what was even more interesting out of that was that Johannesburg Water, Joburg Water, in a matter of a couple of weeks, had a plan and had an emergency budget to do emergency upgrading or rehabilitation of the plant, which shows you what is possible, even in a city and a bureaucracy. And as we learned later, what had happened on the plant was for several years they'd stopped all maintenance. So the plant had basically begun collapsing. And if you consider that this is a mighty plant, I mean, the average, I think, wastewater treatment works does anything from 50 to 150, maybe 200 megaliters a day. This does 450 megaliters a day. It's a massive plant. All of the northern suburbs, apart from the extreme west, is going to Northern Works. In other words, what's north of the ridge, that all goes to Northern Works. So it's a huge mountain that they have to deal with, and they'd stopped maintenance. Now, we also found out later, because the Chief Operating Officer for Joburg Water, who put the plan together and then called us for a meeting in November, at which he laid out the plan and the budget. And he said to us, he said, your pressure has been a huge benefit to us because we were getting nowhere. And he was the Chief Operating Officer of Joburg Water. Now that led to the formation of what's called the Yuxkay River Working Group, which meets every quarter with senior management of Joburg Water. And Etienne Rigaud, the Chief Operating Officer, is always present, very supportive. And what we have been able to do is to learn what the real issues are. And, you know, ideally, of course, what we were looking at was to establish some pressure group that could actually again support authorities, and as we say, challenge them where need be, support them where we can. So that was what led to ARMOUR. As we said, a lobby and pressure group that gives a voice to rivers. And we're very strong on that, as we're saying we're a voice for water. Because water can't always speak for itself. And as we've seen, and to hold those who are responsible accountable, but also to involve civil society. Because it's impossible to expect authorities to do what needs to be done in South Africa. One can decry the situation that they're in, but the fact is, 25 years ago when we did move from, call it an elitist government to a mass government, things changed considerably, and the need to spread resources became imperative. Now, add to that the corruption which has stolen so many resources, and you have a situation where there isn't sufficient to go around. So that's why civil society has to come to the party, or it simply stands on the sideline and criticizes. So we have three priorities. River restoration, we'll speak later about that. Lobbying, that's the sort of thing we did through the petition, through the meetings we have. And there's ongoing meetings to try and both support and challenge authorities to do the work which they have actually been set up to do. And then communication and networking. Now, Helen runs the Facebook page, and that has become the most active. We have well over 1,000 members on that page, the ARMOUR Facebook page. And we're still, Gary is now getting fairly impatient with us, I think, in getting the website sorted out. But we will get there. But the Facebook page is an ongoing daily active exchange of information, updating, and networking across a wide variety of interested parties, individuals, and groups. And of course, our goal is to establish a new river ethos. And I think that's the sort of thing that we are looking for, is a river like that. Now, that happens to be in Johannesburg, and it's the Bryanston Spruit, albeit a selected part of it. One has to be selected, and you can see even there's a little piece up there which was missed on the right-hand side. Maybe a little here on the left, a bit of plastic, but it can be done. And I'll mention again at the end that on October the 20th, I think, Spruit Day, is when 15 or so, 18 residents associations from the north get together and clean up rivers, particularly Bryanston Spruit, but also Chartwell River, Klein Yuxkay through Chartwell, etc. So that's already a group. They do it only once a year, but at least they are beginning to involve people and residents in it, and that's particularly along the Bryanston Spruit. Unfortunately, this is an exception, in Gauteng anyway, an extreme exception.
Which part is that?
Pardon? I'm not sure. This was taken by one of our committee members, John Du Plessis, and I think it's there, where it's near where he lives. Paulshof, somewhere in that area.
Oh,
yeah. And he's very involved in the Spruit Day. Now, the Yuxke itself is polluted often with sewage because of problems at Northern Works. They vastly improved, but there are still issues. I'll come back to that. But after any rain, this is what drifts along, or at least these low-level bridges along the Yuxke are like. And residents have to get out there and clean them up because they are covered with plastic and various other forms of debris. This is not the worst, though, because you know that's also a Yuxke River. When a sandworks upriver, see that's as far as we can understand, cleans out its equipment, then the river runs yellow. And we've had the Department of Water and Sanitation there, but it doesn't seem to have made the slightest difference. We actually took them there to the works, to the sandworks. And initially they denied it could be them, and we showed them Google Earth pictures. And the guy had to say, yes, that does look like our place. Ah. But this is one of our problems, the lack of what shall I say, officials really carrying out their mandate consistently and strictly, as opposed to saying, ah, yes, we see, and you shouldn't do this, and then going away and leaving it, which is unfortunately what happened. But while the Yuxke is bad, there is one river which I think must probably take the crown for South Africa for sheer pollution. And that is the Hennips River, or shall we say, this is the start of one of the tributaries of the Hennips River. It's a Karlspruit in Kaalfontein, Tembisa. That is actually, after cleanups had already been through there at different times. So the sewage overflowing from a manhole, the rubbish dumped in the river, etc. Now, that's a little way down on the Karlspruit, where the river is trying to actually make its way through all this debris. Now, it's easy to blame informal settlements, but in many occasions, they actually don't have rubbish collection. And part of the reason is because of illegal shacks. They actually don't. Illegal shacks are built all over the place, so lorries can't get in there to collect rubbish anyway. You can only walk through it. So therefore, where do they dump rubbish? But still, it's a lack of pride. It's a lack of any care. But the Hennips River itself, this is, does anyone know the Royal Elephant Hotel? Along the Hennips River in Pretoria near the Swartkorp Country Club. That is foam coming out of the river onto the river bank. It's actually taller than I am, the foam. It's from toxic waste, it's from detergents, it's from all range of things. Nobody can tell us exactly what, because until it's, I suppose, analysed, one doesn't really know. Authorities have no idea what it is. They can't tell you. They speculate. The Agricultural Research Council in Irene, there's a little weir that runs across the river that flows into the Hennips. And that is what that weir looks like at the Agricultural Research Council.
Sorry, are these all current photographs?
Yes. These were taken within the last month. Pardon? July, yes, July. This was done, they were cleaning up there actually, so one group was started, and that was at the start of their cleanup. But this is the result of the Olifantsfontein wastewater treatment works not working, or not not working properly, and that is in the Ekurhuleni, not in Johannesburg. There's more cooperation from the city of Joburg than there is from the city of Ekurhuleni. And they have many more waste treatment works than Johannesburg, but very much smaller ones. Olifantsfontein is just working only at about, 30-40% efficiency, but it is, I think it has something like a capacity of about 130 megalitres a day. It's getting like 180. And therefore it cannot cope. and one of its three, I don't know the terms, reactors, whatever, is broken down, has never been fixed, and therefore it just overflows. But I have to come back to one person who's a member of our committee but has his own NGO called Fresh, Willem Snyman. He's an unlikely activist because he's a sort of a poet and an artist, and they tend to be quite theoretical sometimes. And Willem, many years ago when we first met him, had an extraordinary vision for developing a river sanctuary across the whole northern suburbs of Johannesburg, because of the way the rivers, the Yuxkay, the Crocodile, the Hennips and all their tributaries form a network, and many of them are still running through natural areas. And he developed a vision which he has written about, talked about, painted, of a river sanctuary. And it got to a point sometimes when Willem would be at a meeting and Willem would start talking about his vision, and you could see people's eyes would begin to glaze over. But Willem persisted. And in October last year, he simply said, I have now walked the Hennips River and all its tributaries right into Karlspruit, into Karlfontein, into Duigan, into various places. He's walked it. And he said, I know what it looks like. And he says, I'm now starting. I'm starting to clean it up and restore it. And he began. And he began where I showed you those very dirty, ugly parts of Karlspruit. And he began with a few people, speaking to the community. He got support from some councillors from Ekurhuleni, a very good councillor in Ekurhuleni, and simply began. He was threatened at various times, but he persisted. And the one thing about Willem is he has driven by a vision and will not give up. So he is what we call our river ranger, and I believe he's got a particular, what shall I say, connection with the river, beyond with the normal. But he's had now that group there. I spoke earlier, they're all from Leeuwendevoort Church, that group in Centurion. They've got a church which is near the Hennips River, and they're very involved. They're members in cleaning up. They're a great example, I think, of a religious community, if I can put it that way. But it's a whole family thing. Families get together and they simply start cleaning up. Now, you'll notice that this person on the right, in the green top, she's actually got a plastic bottle and she's stuffing it with soft plastics that have been taken out the river. And those are what you call eco bricks. You've probably heard of eco bricks, which you can use for building. I'll show you some eco bricks a little later. But all members of the family took part. This is a wonderful thing. I look around the room and all of us, Gary's the youngest, I think, all of us are grey, in a sense. So we're at that other end of the human spectrum. But what's intriguing with Willem is that the bulk of his people, if you look at these, are young families, black and white, that are actually getting involved in the river cleanup. And I think that's a huge boost. He has 300-400 people at a time along the Hennips. I mean, even down to this little guy who's, was in a kayak, was taking rubbish which had been collected in the river and taking it to the bank. So you can see it becomes a whole family occasion. I spoke about the Royal Elephant Hotel, which is near the Country Club Victoria. Now, they're standing on the river. That is an island of plastic in the river, solid. You can walk across it. And they had a major problem there because the idea was they wanted to clear it. And when they looked at it, they realized impossible. You would need heavy machinery. Now they approached the army, because the army, Voortrekhoogte, is not that far away. And the army were interested to say, well, look, we'll look at it. And then they realized the unintended consequences. Because in a sense, if you remove that, it's become something of a barrier. So it's actually collecting a lot of the plastic coming down, although the river runs underneath it. It's just created, I don't know how deep it is. Hi, have a seat. Huh? So I think that is the effect of years and years of the plastic being pushed against a barrier and just building up and becoming a solid island, a bit like you have in the Pacific Ocean. So, I mean, the extent of public involvement goes way beyond the so-called white middle-class communities. People in Carlsbreed, Carlfontein rather, alongside the Carlsbreed, have got involved in cleaning up the area. The Leeuwenhoek-Bos, this was earlier, this was June, I think, the Leeuwenhoek-Bos, which is not that far from here, even though it's in Pretoria. So there is involvement from the community. It's not just simply a few, shall I say, white upper-class people deciding to get involved in something. Now those are the eco bricks. They're bottles stuffed with soft plastic, and this was in, actually that is at one of the headwaters of the, this was a Carlsbreed, was it? Carlsbreed, yeah. And that was when, April, May, we were there? Can't remember. Anyway, earlier this year. So you can see that you know, there's many ways of tackling this problem of waste. It's actually an opportunity. Now this is a small thing. You're not going to create a huge industry by taking some plastic out of the river and making eco bricks and then using them. But in Kenya, they use it to build buildings, eco bricks. So it's only, I think, starting to understand what can be used with our waste. Yeah, that's another group doing the same. Now, one of the ugly sides, the very ugly sides of what is happening in the informal settlements, and this was in Ivory Park earlier this year. What is happening? It happens in Diepsloot, it's happening in Alexandra Township, it's happening in Ivory Park. What's happening is you have people called developers. They call themselves developers. They sometimes hijack, bring in trucks with building rubble, and they dump that into the rivers and into the wetlands. They flatten it, they put shacks on it, and then sell them. Now you can see in the middle of that is a manhole cover for a sewer. Some of those manholes are up to 20 meters under rubble. And that's why when you have a sewer blockage, Joburg Water has to try and find a sewer in between shacks, buried up to 20 meters deep. And that's not an exaggeration. Those are the statistics given by the Chief Operating Officer for Joburg Water. And that's what's happening. Now the question one has to ask is, where are the politicians? Where is the management? Where are the decision makers? Well, unfortunately, certainly in Alexandra Township, the politicians are involved in this, in dumping, in selling stands. In Diepsloot, I think it's very much the same. There is a young couple there, an extraordinary couple, involved in Diepsloot in waste, what would you call waste recycling, etc. And when they challenged a councillor about trucks that were coming in and dumping under his guidance, they were assaulted. Well, the woman, she was assaulted by the councillor. So that, I think, is one of the biggest challenges we have, is the disobedience, civil disobedience of a very destructive nature, which is actually destroying areas, and how one rehabilitates them is going to be something else. But I want to go back from there, because Willem, by the way, in this particular place, he went and spoke to one of the lorry drivers and said, but hold on, how come this is happening? What's going on? Why is this happening? And he was then, a couple of the residents came to him and said, Willem, because he'd created his own network in the area. Slowly he'd built up friendships. And they said, get out of here fast if you value your life. It is beyond you to solve this one. Just leave now, which he did. And he said he's seen it again and again, but you cannot interfere as an individual. So it's one of the challenges. But to return to the river, 2 weekends ago, well, it started in July. Willem Snyman and his group decided now that they were going to start at the headwaters of the main tributary of the Hennips, which is a Karlspreid. And they were going to start and they were going to walk and canoe the entire distance of 100 kilometers down to Hartbeespoort Dam. And they did it over 2 weekends. Well, it was a bit, they even worked into, I think they started on a Friday, went through to Sunday, but over 2 weekends, they kayaked all the way down where they could, getting out, carrying their kayaks where they couldn't. And finally, they reached the dam. That's Willem in his kayak on Hartbeespoort Dam, which actually looks rather nice. It doesn't look full of green stuff at all. But that's where he came out from the Yukskei into the dam. 100 roughly kilometers. And that's the longest river in Gauteng, which is the Hennips. The longest through the most beautiful natural area of Gauteng, but also the most polluted. And that's why the Hennips River Restoration program or initiative, which began in October last year, continues non-stop. Next weekend, what's the date today? The 11th. Next weekend, next Saturday, they are going to be cleaning again along the Hennips River. But, you know, while one talks about our Gauteng rivers, the Yukskei, the Hennips, and the Crocodile, which of course runs into the Yukskei and then it becomes a crocodile river. Other parts of the country are equally polluted. And this is a friend that Helen got connected with through Facebook called Help Up in Cape Town. They, for the past 24 weeks, every Sunday, they're out cleaning the Black River. And they have pulled out 24 metric tons of rubbish. And one of the worst pollutants is soiled disposable nappies. In one weekend, 300 soiled disposable nappies collected in Black River alone. Now, that's the one thing that is perhaps the most obnoxious and difficult to deal with along the rivers, because Hennips is exactly the same. Where's it disappeared to? Was it my battery? Oh, you know what? I didn't plug in my computer. Sorry, the battery has died.
Here we go.
Never mind. It's all right. I'll have to plug it in. And then won't you get me
It's back on.
the...
Yeah.
Just your one back.
Oh, that's it. Ah, all right. Soil disposable nappies are one of the worst pollutants because of their nature, and also the problem being that disposable nappies do not burn. They will remain for years and years and can be burnt regularly, and it will remain as a lump of whatever the chemicals are upon which they're made. 400 to 500 years they might biodegrade. So this, I think, is one of the issues that we are taking up as one of our campaigns, and that is tackling the manufacturers of disposable nappies, Procter & Gamble, Kimberly-Clark, two main ones, and they are part of a manufacturer's body that meets with the Department of Environment to begin to try and find solutions. But I think they are very defensive, as we've discovered, of their product, because, as they say, it's not our responsibility once we have sold it. And we are saying, sorry, the cost of your product is not just your cost of manufacturing, it's the cost of the eco services which you are impacting on, which is also the total cost of your product. That's going to be a long, ongoing battle, because the other side of it is to persuade people to go back to a far less convenient form of cloth nappies. Disposable nappies are terribly convenient. I mean, our children use them. That's how we found out that you cannot destroy them. 16 years of sitting in a dump near Hardebeespoort Dam and being burnt regularly, and there the nappies were dug up again from that dump, still there. So that's another battle one's going to have. Styrofoam, single-use plastics, and even hard plastics, and disposable nappies. Those are the things that are actually destroying our common water. And our only hope is, in fact, to actually begin to tackle it at source as much as we can, which means you have to tackle it in several different ways. That's why lobbying the authorities to accept and to live by the mandate for management, but also civil society taking action. You cannot have one without the other. So what does it mean? Yeah. Long before Pope Francis came up with Laudato Si, a Rabbi Menachem Schneerson said something which I think sums it up perfectly, exactly what the Pope was saying. He summarized Laudato Si. And that is, if you see what needs to be repaired now to repair it, then you found a piece of the world God's left for you to complete. But if you only see what's wrong and what's ugly in the world, then it's you yourself that needs repairing. Now I think that's where civil society comes in, particularly, as Helen would say, running Facebook. People, you know, sometimes they feel they need to say something. So it's terrible, it's awful, somebody should do something. That's fine as far as it goes. It means they've had a bit of a say, but it doesn't mean they've made a jot of difference to anything. And that's why I think that as Catholics, as Christians, you know, 4 years ago with Laudato Si, the Pope, for the first time in a long time, put a solid stake in the ground with regards to care for our common home. There's a very well-known Franciscan priest in Kenya called Father Herman Borg, and he has won various awards because he's planted, well, he, through his little NGO network in Subukia in Kenya, they've planted more than 1 million trees, and so one thing Kenya needs is trees because it's been so badly deforested. And he said at a United Nations convention some years ago that the Catholic Church has been severely lacking in tackling environmental issues. This was before Pope Francis's Encyclical. And I think he's perfectly correct. We've been actually quite backward in coming forward on the environment, mainly because we probably thought that, as Genesis says, you know, God has given us dominion, meaning control over creation. Well, as Laudato Si explains it, that doesn't mean that at all. Responsibility, yes. Control, no. Coexistence, yes. So as he says, hear the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. And I think his encyclical does not just talk about the environment. That's the important thing. The environment is a core part of it, but he talks very much about the economy and consumerism and the danger of being sucked into the consumer society. And I think that that is why I respond to something that Gary raised. Gary, have you ever talked about your Laudato Si Foundation?
No.
Do you want to talk about it?
No, we'll leave that with Justice Please later.
Well, it's something to follow up because, you know, Gary's talked about the three, what shall I call it, pillars of Laudato Si. The first is faith, and he's very strong on, in the Encyclical, about the relationship between God, the environment, and humanity. And number two was simplicity. And the Pope talks about the dangers of consumerism and of being sucked into what we are told through advertising, which actually saps our strength. And as he said, the external deserts of the world are growing because the internal deserts have become so vast. So that the ecological crisis is a summons to profound inner conversion. And the third thing is the earth, taking care of the earth. So the big question is then, what part of the earth has God given to us to actually repair? And there's many things that we can do. Because the big question is, okay, so what can I do? Firstly, inform yourself. There is the ARMOUR Facebook and there are many other ways. So go on to that because you'll find a lot of information coming through. Helen spends several hours a day on it because it's become such a useful communication tool. I don't know if you have a Laudato Si study group going. Do you?
Well, we call it Greening the Parish. It's
Yeah.
a sustainability project.
Because if you just, what I found reading it, it's actually so profound in many of the things it says. It talks so much about the modern age, what we need to do, and how to engage with the politics, with the social situation, and with economics. So I think, you know, even a study group that looks at it will give directions of thinking, because out of that, that's where creativity and new ideas come from. There's a global Catholic climate movement, which is becoming very active. I joined it through Gary a little while ago, and gee, I'm getting emails every day from them with things which they're doing. And I think they've got a lot of young people involved. And there is the Catholic Youth Network for Environmental Sustainability in Africa, quite a mouthful, very active in Kenya, and really with a huge gathering of young people, as I saw on the internet earlier this year in May, I think. Have you come across the South African Faith Communities Environmental Initiative, SAFSE? You know them. It's worth keeping connection with them. They're very strong in the Cape, less so up here. But it's more driven by Anglicans, Methodists, and I don't know how many Catholics are around in it, which surprises me. There's Spruit Day. It's a Saturday, I think it's October the 19th. That's worth getting involved in because it's the residents' associations of this whole catchment area. I will forward you information on this. Judy, I'll send it to you, the connections with the Spruit Day. There's the Hennips River Restoration and others. Now, Hennips is far away maybe, but the Yuxke is nearby and there are a number of initiatives happening along the Yuxke. Helen knows of those initiatives. And then we have a Gauteng River Network which probably meets twice a year, and that tries to pull together all the people involved in the actual river restoration, if I can say that. Now, I've spoken longer than I anticipated. It's now 9:45. So I don't know if there are any questions that anybody wants to ask or comments, but all I want to do is to say, here is a problem, there are people tackling it, and we need to get involved both as a faith group, and as civil society. Thank you.
Can I just say hello? How many of you are on your way to 10 o'clock Mass?
There we are.
There you are.
Sorry, Helen's favourite picture, so I nearly forgot it. Where's the picture you said? That is a styrofoam, piece of styrofoam, a heart taken out of Hennep's River. So anyway, there we are. Huh? Sorry, Helena, I nearly forgot your picture. Huh?
As far as nappies are concerned, it's not unique to South Africa. What
No,
has
no.
the rest of the world done about changing the chemical?
Well, Procter & Gamble are investigating a biodegradable nappy, but it could take 10 years to get to the marketplace. However, in South Africa, we don't have proper disposal. That's the problem. If there were proper bins, and there is a pilot project down in KZN which is working successfully, whereby, because they're an informal settlement, they've got an ablution block, and what they've organised, they've got specific bins there for disposable nappies, and they, a conservancy, Kloof Conservancy have organised this, and they have got monitors, or what do they call them, that sort of go through the community educating the young mothers on where to put their nappies. It's working extremely well. And then the municipality removes the bins to a refuse dump. Now it's a partial solution. I mean, once they get in the refuse dump, they're still not going to biodegrade. But that's another problem. But at least they are dealing with it on the ground. So that is it's only a pilot project at the moment. But that's our big problem. You don't have disposal, you don't have proper waste management in informal settlements where even trucks can't get in, there aren't bins, people have nowhere to dump. They end up now dumping in a river because it tends to be taken away. Okay.
What has happened in the Line and is it the Line and Rhino Park, where the water was so toxic? I think was it the hippo.
That's acid mine drainage. That's another whole subject. That's a different type of pollution. And if you want to learn about that, Marietta Lieferink has been tackling that for years. You know about her, okay. Yes, that is what is leaching from mine dumps, and which is coming out from underground, from mines that have now no longer operational, decanting out of mine shafts. And it is the pyrites, and it's a whole combination of chemicals, which is very toxic and known as acid mine drainage. And that has now been draining into, on the West Rand, the Crocodile River, which comes into the Yuxkay, has got acid mine drainage in it.
And are they looking into that?
There are two plants on the West Rand and East Rand that are pumping out the water from the mines, etc., and what's the word? It's not purifying it, but they are neutralizing to an extent the water. But it's vastly underfunded. And that's where you can't always blame a government for that. It's the mining companies. That many mines have just been abandoned, and now it's the government's responsibility to try and figure out what to do with it. And that's a mega billions of rands to deal with it properly. So they're dealing with it in a small way, but not as comprehensively as could be.
I understand that, to give one an idea of the volumes, one of the shafts of not an abandoned mine, but maintenance mine, are discharging 70 million litres of water a day.
70 million litres of water a day discharged from one shaft, yeah.
And it goes into the
Rietspruit, which runs through Olivenhout Bos.
that direction.
Yeah.
And then there's one on the West Rand. And the problem is this water comes to surface. It's very acidic, but it's very high in iron.
That's right. You can see the colour of the reddish orange. Yeah.
So, and sorry to sound technical, but if the pH is somewhere, it can be as low as 2.5, but the pH of the water could be So if you want to neutralize, then you take the pH from 2.5 to 4, or you now want to raise it to 8, because if you raise the pH to 8, you precipitate all the iron. So they have to do it in stages, because if they did it all at once, the iron just bombs out and then you just again. And so it's quite a technical process.
Yes.
But all they're doing at the moment is purely precipitating the iron, and by raising the pH to about 8.2, 8.4.
That's what they're doing in the two plants. Yeah.
Yeah, so they're not effectively doing anything.
That's right.
Other materials go down with it, but predominantly getting the iron
Yeah.
down to the water, which gives it its brown colour.
But one reason why, sorry, very quickly, why it's so important for people who are or should have a mandate, like Catholics, for the care of our common home, is because while we're talking this pollution that we show, and you can see it, but there is the unseen pollution, which is even more dangerous. Microcystins, what they call the endocrine arresters, which are in the water, which is not tested for. It's not part of the protocols of the Department of Water and Sanitation. They're the guardians of our water. They do not require testing for endocrine arresters or any other forms beyond the normal E. coli and those other things. So that's another whole ball game, which is why we, as civil society, and who believe in something in an earth that is beyond just what we see, it's our responsibility to do something, get involved. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Anthony. And you both depressed us and inspired us. And I think, you pointed out the age group. There are things, we passed cleaning up and all those things, but there are things that we can do, and we're just going to get on and do it. And including, we're going to try again on a Sunday to have study groups and speakers and awareness programs. And I want to thank you very much for coming, because at one time it looked as though it would be Gary, Marion and I. So, and of course Helen and Anthony. So thank you very much for your support. And Marion, I did ask Marion to thank you, and then she dashed off and did a little tour, and now here she is again. But she went, of course, that this is a Catholic church. So this is not an ingot. It's a little token of appreciation.
Thank you very much.
You have to share it.
Oh, right. Very good.
So we'll excuse those of you.
Thank you very much.
Be early or nearly early for Mass. And yeah, the rest of you feel free to stay.
And that's the way you'll get exposed.
Funny enough, the Hips Restoration Project is actually gone quite on the Victoria, because obviously it's Victoria River. Willem himself has been on radio quite a lot, and people have all taken videos of